What's up? Welcome back to another video right here on Free Will Photos. We're going to continue with the Exploring ON1 series. And today what I'm going to be doing is really exploring Super Select AI inside of ON1. Now you do have to have Photo Raw 2024. I can't remember if it was in 2023. It probably was. I think it was. But you have to have one of the more recent versions of ON1 Photo Raw in order to have this capability. But I went to my daughter's dance recital, which was yesterday, or Saturday, May 18th. I'm recording this video on the 19th now that I've had a moment to rest, and this photo captured me and I wanted to edit this. So let's go ahead and get started. But before we do, if you want to pick up ON1 Photo Raw or save some money over at the ON1 store, consider using my coupon code FreeWillPhotos20. Now, here we go. So the first step that I always do, and this is a raw image, is I like to start with Brilliance AI in Photo Raw 2024. To me, this is just one of the fastest ways to get a good starting point of the overall image. Now, it's not always perfect, and in fact, it usually needs a little bit of tweaking, but it gets me about 90 to 95% of the way, which I'm okay with because it's adjustments that I would make and they come in a very balanced way. All right. So you can see that one, it got rid of a lot of the noise, which I'm okay with. I was okay with the noise. That's a personal choice, but I'm not going to really mess with that because today I really just wanted to explore editing a photo using the Super Select AI. Although I wanted to look through my camera profiles just to see if any of these other ones give me a more interesting look. I kind of like the ON1 Vivid option. And yeah, I think I'm going to go with ON1 Vivid. I like what it does there. ON1 Standard is good. It's a more natural look. In fact, we'll start with ON1 Standard just because I think that that's a good place to go. So now what I want to do is just come over here to the left. I'm going to hover over the Super Select AI tool. And if you hit the letter K on your keyboard, it'll just, jump forward you to that tool. But I'm just going to go ahead and use my mouse and click on it. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the AI masking capabilities built into ON1, you can essentially just hover over things and select them. As you see, I hover over the curtains. I can select pretty much all of the curtains. If I hover over my daughter, you can see I select just her. And that's a relatively straightforward process. So the first thing that I like to do is really darken the background because I don't want to increase exposure on my daughter any more than I have to based off of the lighting condition that I was photographing this in. I did the best I could to keep the highlights from getting blown out. Let me see if I can, so you can see it's kind of blown out on her shoulder there. But that is that was the scenario I was in. So what I'm going to do is left click selecting the curtains. And then if I right click, I get this little pop-up, and this allows me to choose essentially the effects that I want. So what I want to do is darken this. So if I hover over adjustments, this is going to apply a local adjustment. I can also select any of the other tools or filters, I should say, inside of ON1 this way, so you can kind of get a preview of, hey, what does this look like when it goes on to there. But what I want to do is lower the exposure so I can essentially darken these curtains. So I'm just going to go ahead and click that, and it has now darkened the curtains in the background. Now I can come back and modify this, but let's hit the letter O. And you can see what it's done to the mask. So it's really only selected the curtains in the background. There are some areas that could get cleaned up here, but we're not going for absolute perfect. We're just going for relatively clean image. All right. And I think that that actually did a pretty good job. So if I were to turn this off and turn it back on, you could see what it's doing there. I could just pull that down a little bit further, and that just emphasizes my daughter that much more. Now, I am a parent of my daughter, and there's another child in this photo. There's a few different options that I could do. All right. The first option is I could just crop the image, and let me show you what that would look like. I think we can all imagine what a crop would look like. I'll just pull this in. I'm using a 3:4 ratio, and I could put her on the right third, and this crop gives me actually a little bit more room, and I'm able to really focus in on my daughter in this regard, and maybe even level this out a little bit since it was a little crooked. It's always hard when people are moving, and where I was sitting wasn't like a press area. It was just a spectator spot. But this is actually a really great image. Now, the reason why I don't want to crop it is because I am working on telling the story of the image. So I'm actually just going to revert this to the original frame and hit the close there. We're going to hit the letter K this time to get the Super Select AI. And I'm going to hover over this young lady that's in the dance as well. Again, I want this to show that there are other people. So I need her in the frame as reference, but I don't need her to be as prominent in the frame. So what I'm going to do is select her, right click, add adjustment, and I'm going to minus the exposure on her. Now, that doesn't look so good. I'm looking at the preview. So maybe I want to minus the shadows on her. And this is going to help her contrast and kind of blend into the background. And I may actually drop the exposure on her a little bit as well. But as I pull this down, I'm not like losing full detail on her. She's just not the main focus. I can pull down on the exposure just a little bit, kind of putting her into like a shadow. And that actually gave me a good idea that I'm going to try out in this image. Now, the next area is like the spectators down here. They're relatively dark already. So I'm just going to make them darker. I'm going to select them. And even the stage, I'll make that a little bit darker as well. I'm going to right click, select adjustment, and then negative exposure. And so now this is really just making my daughter the brightest subject in the image. And I think that that looks pretty good. So now what I can do is come over to my daughter and work on making her even more prominent in the frame. I'm going to right click after I select her, hit adjustments, and then I'm going to go to plus on the shadows. And you can see how that gives her almost like a spotlight effect. And since we are going in that direction, that might be a little too much. So we'll pull down just a bit. And let's turn that off and on just to make sure. Yeah, it's opening up everything. I think that looks really good. The shadows are open. Maybe we'll contrast her a bit more and add just a touch of exposure. I'm going to hold down the J key and see if I can minimize that hotspot by pulling down on the highlights to about there. Now, I don't think I'm going to print this image, so this probably isn't that big of a deal for me to have those highlights completely reduced. But for a technical option, it makes sense to at least have it ready, that it's not going to cause any issues. So now that I have the overall image exposed well, let's see what we had before. This is the before, and this is after all of the Super Select AI edits. Now it's time for me to kind of explore. So I'm going to hit the Z key just so I get my zoom tool and I can kind of move around freely. What I think I want to do is add like a spotlight that is perceived, so when everything else around her doesn't look like it looks like the light was intentionally on her for the moment, right? Little bias. It's my child. It is what it is. All right. Let me know in the comment section if you're a parent and you just want to like capitalize on images of your child. I digress from that. So what I'm going to do is hit add adjustment, because what I think I need to do here is kind of add a shadow increase. Maybe not a one-stop exposure adjustment. Maybe we'll go about half a stop underexposed, and maybe we'll even contrast that area just a little bit more, and we'll bring down the mids. I don't know. I'm just guessing right now. And what I'm going to do is we'll try it with a radial gradient first. All right. So I'll grab let's go with a strong vignette. Let's click right there. Okay. And I'm just going to narrow this a little bit. And then we're going to rotate it. All right. Turn it like so, because the lights are coming from the top, really from like the in Z space, or closer to me, pointing in towards her, but from above, if that makes sense. Probably didn't, but that's okay. I'm going to open this up a little bit and maybe even spread that. Let's pull this down just a touch. And I think that's actually causing somewhat of that spotlight effect, right? This is actually more of what I wanted to go with. So let's just pull down the shadows, and you could see the girl that's over here on the right side, she just kind of fades into that shadow, and the focus is really happening right here in the center of the frame. I wonder if I can come over to effects. Let's go ahead and add in a lens blur. Now, this is one of those things you kind of gotta play around with, see what happens. But let me go ahead and apply this. I'm going to shrink it down, turn it again to match similar to what we had for that spotlight. I'll make it a little bit larger, and I wanted to make it a little bit more narrow, maybe like so. And then I'll just pull this out, and maybe we will focus it in a little bit more, maybe something like that. And now I think that maybe if I pull down on the opacity, because it doesn't need to be like crazy strong, right? I still get that idea that there is another dancer. There's more dancers. I just happen to zoom in or focus in on just my daughter. But there's a dancer just outside of frame left. This other dancer, she was just closer to my daughter, so there wasn't a way for me to really crop her out when I was photographing. All right, you can see I was at 150 millimeters, which is the furthest end of my Samyang 35 to 150. So that was as close as I could get, and that was the best I could do on cropping in the camera. With that being said, I do think that it was a little crooked, so I'm going to grab the crop tool and I'm going to use the level. So let's go ahead and grab the level. I'm just going to click here and stop it about there, and that levels it out. So now my verticals look pretty good and everything is the way it ought to be. Instead of freeform, I'm going to go 2 to 3 because that is my camera's ratio, my sensor size, and I'm just going to crop this in. Now I am working with a 61 megapixel image here, so I have a lot of room to crop, and that's the reason why I'm not overly concerned about it. I want to leave a little bit of looking room, but I kind of want this to be on the third intersecting her top eye. From a compositional standpoint, I think that just makes the most sense. And it probably, now looking at this, would have been nice to have a third person over here to kind of balance the frame symmetrically. but you get what you get when you photograph and things are happening in front of you as fast as they are happening, right? This is only a split second in the dance, and that's what I was able to capture of my daughter. So let's go ahead and hit the backslash key, see what we got here. This is the before, and this is the after. Now, what I think I want to do is work with the colors of her costume. So I'm going to hit add filter, and let's go with a color enhancer. And then I want to come down and let's see what color this targets. It looks like it's targeting the magenta, but it's not really doing much of anything, right? Okay, I guess it is. I'm just missing it. So let me saturate it a little bit more and maybe darken it up a touch. I know I made her brighter overall, but I think it's important to have some sort of balance in the color. So let's come over here and maybe see what happens in the purples. If I push purple towards magenta a little bit, add a little bit more saturation, and pull down on the brightness again. So I think her dress is looking well, or her costume is looking pretty decent. But I'm not a fan of adding these purple hues onto the skin. So what I'm going to do is grab my brush tool and erase that away. Now, the way that I'm going to erase this away is going to be using the refinement brush. And what I'm going to do is, let's see here. We want to subtract it. So we're going to go with paint out, and I'm going to select all the way around my daughter's face here. And, you know, we'll even go around her hair, just so that way I'm removing this area completely. So we'll do that, and hopefully that should give us the mask that we're going for. Otherwise, I'm going to have to invert it, which that's perfectly fine. Okay, yeah, so hit the letter O. It's protecting her face. And then I'm going to go around her arm here as well. And I'm just going to do this very roughly. You can take your time, but some edits don't actually require extreme precision. They just require relative understanding. So if I hit the letter O, I got her arm pretty good there. So I'm good to go, because I'm okay with that going everywhere else. But what I'm going to do is click on this mask, come over here and copy it. And I want to work on making her skin look a little bit more realistic, because the lights, they kind of washed her out. The exposure that I did also washed her out, and her skin is not that light or fair. So I want to darken it up a little bit, as well as add a little bit of a warmer tone to it. So that's what we're going to do next, as soon as this mask gets done copying. And while it does that, I'm going to sip some coffee. The way that I like to work with skin, it happens in a few different tools. But for this one, I think I'm going to start with a... where do I want to start? I think I'm going to start with a color enhancer. We'll go with that. All right. See if this gets us what, or gets me what I'm looking for. Let's go ahead and paste that in. And then we're going to invert it. So now I am only focusing in on her skin. And we are going to saturate it a little bit more. Yeah, something like that. We're going to add a little bit of a warmer temperature. And then what I'm going to do is come over to the reds, and I'm going to pull down on the brightness. And I probably need to go into the oranges and do the same, pull down on the brightness just a touch here. Well, not a touch, that's quite a bit. Let's see if a hue adjustment in the oranges. Nope, that's not really doing much of anything. And yeah, so this tells me I need a local adjustment to really target the tones. Now I could do local adjustment, or I could add filter and use my second tool that I use, which is the tone enhancer. Now I use the tone enhancer for quite a few reasons. And let me just go ahead and paste this in, and I'll explain it here in a second. So pasting in the mask, and then we're going to invert, so my tone adjustment is only applying to the skin. Now I could bring down the exposure on the skin separately, but this gets a little heavy-handed, so I don't really like using the exposure when I use this particular tool. Instead, what I like to do is come down to the curves filter first. All right. And by simply dragging in my black point just a little bit, like I'm going to do it a lot just so I can show you how it's impacting the overall tone. But this allows me to really keep that contrast. Now, I don't need this to be pulled in a whole lot. I just need it to be pulled in a little bit. And then what I'm going to do is kind of eyeball where I think the dark tones are in the curve here. And I'm just going to pull down to reintroduce some deeper shadows, because her face doesn't need to be fully exposed, and this is only applying to her skin, so I do need to be careful that I don't over or underexpose her skin in relationship to everything else. And this is purely to add in some color. And then what I do is I'll come to the blue channel, and I'll do the same thing of pulling in towards yellow. Now I got to be careful of how I do this, because I'm starting to get some weird discoloration on her skin. And you know, this is all trial and error. I'm not going to play around with this too much, because again, this is just one of those things you got to play with, and it does take some time to get it where you want it. Now she looks like way too yellow. If I turn this off, you can see the difference. Turn it back on. So this is where you can play with opacity and even blend modes. But for the sake of not exploring blend modes today, I think I'll make opacity work for this particular look. Now, some of you may be wondering, like, well, Chris, why did you go for a tone enhancer when you could have just added a curves adjustment, since all you did was modify the curves? Well, the reason for that is when I work with skin, I usually work with detail and tone at the same time. And to have it all in one area is great, because I have this detail slider. Now, because this isn't like a crazy up close portrait of my daughter, and you know, I wonder if Portrait AI actually triggered here. Let me click that real quick. It may not have. No, I didn't. Okay. So because this isn't like a close-up portrait, I don't really have to worry about skin detail, because she's far enough away, and the way that the no noise AI worked out in this image, it didn't actually leave a bunch of detail in her skin that needed to be retouched out. So I think that this works well. But in some cases, I do need to modify the skin. So what I do is I use the tone enhancer, and I modify the tone and detail all in one go, because most of the time, I should say, my detail and tone are usually needing to be modified together. But I don't need that in this image, so I'm not going to worry about it. So here is the overall before. with the noise reduction. And then here is the after. Now, I think I could probably get away with lowering the opacity of the entire effect stack here, which actually, yeah, okay. So I can probably get away with lowering the entire effect stack here to something about there. And that just blends the overall image pretty decent, in my opinion. And yeah, I think this is the final edit. So hopefully you found some value in this particular video where I use Super Select AI to kind of set the tone coupled with Brilliance AI. And you could do so much inside of ON1. I'm really just scratching the surface, but when you have an idea of what it is that you want to do, you'll see hopefully through this series that you can really come up with a lot of different options. I went with a relatively simple idea here based off of the tone and what I want to do with this overall image for my sequence. But you could go like crazy. If I wanted to, I could have color graded this completely different by adding a LUT, by adding a split tone filter, by working in color balance. But I didn't want to go too far from what was already seen. And after I share these with my daughter, I'll probably go a little bit more crazy. So stay tuned, maybe more videos about how I would have gone more drastic with the color in this particular image. If you found value, smash the like button. If you're new here and you want to see more, hit that subscribe button. And if you got questions, let me know in the comment section below. And until next time, I want you to stay inspired and keep creating. Peace.